The top headliner is we're going to talk about sanctuary cities because LA, just like Gavin Newsom, wasted no time in grandstanding about their opposition and their resistance to Gavin Newsom, then declaring that they will be a sanctuary city. Now, sanctuary cities have been in vogue. They've been out of vogue. They're now back in vogue because Donald Trump's in office and he's promised mass deportations. So they have voted, the City Council of Los Angeles has voted to be a sanctuary city, to thumb their nose. So we're going to talk about that. What is a sanctuary city? Is it legal? People are always like, is it legal to be a sanctuary city? So what is a sanctuary city? Let's start with that. We're going to go all the way back to 2017. 2017 was the first year that Donald Trump was in office. And in 2017, then Senate President, so this is the California legislature, Senate President pro temp Kevin De Leon, who we all now know is the disgraced city council member of Los Angeles, was the author of Senate Bill 54, and he claimed that, quote, immigrants are valuable and essential members of the California community, end quote, and all attempts to enforce immigration laws create fear of the police among, quote, immigrant community members who fear approaching police when they are victims of or witnesses to crime. According to De Leon, this is from the California Globe, the purpose of this bill is to protect the safety and well-being of all Californians by ensuring that state and local resources are not used to fuel mass deportations, separate families, and ultimately hurt California's economy. SB 54 limits state and local law enforcement agencies' involvement in immigration enforcement, ensures that eligible individuals are able to seek services from and engage with state agencies without regard to their immigration status. It also turned California into a sanctuary state. All right, so that's where it sort of all started way back in 2017 when California was a sanctuary state. A personal story, I was in law school when Donald Trump was elected. And when he was elected, it was almost immediately the dean of the law school sent out an email. And he went on this whole tirade about how they would not allow ICE agents to come onto our law school campus and harass students. To which I thought, that's kind of odd, because how would you be in law school if you don't have any sort of documented status? Like, you have to prove either you're on a visa, like you can't just be in an American law school without some sort of visa. You can't be completely undocumented. And I realized to myself, I said, well, this is clearly because he's fear-mongering and he's pushing this narrative. I asked for a meeting with him. I went up to his office and I kind of said to him, I was like, hey, like, what are you doing? Like, what's the point of this? You know, it just seems like you're fear-mongering, like you're not really helping the situation by saying that ICE agents are going to be coming onto law school campus and start grabbing people out of classrooms. Like, that's completely, it's just complete fear-mongering. It's completely ridiculous. And he looks me in the eye and he goes, yeah, so what? I go, but you're kind of already fear-mongering and making people who supported this president and voted for this president, like, you make us out to look like bad guys on campus if we supported this president, and you're fear-mongering and fanning the flames that we supported this monster who might come in and send, like, stormtroopers in to come take them out of classrooms. And he goes, yeah, so what? Law schools are liberal. What do you want me to do about it? And I was like blown away by this guy's answer. And like, he just did not care. He was like, yeah, whatever. I hear you, but whatever. Like, what do you want me to do about it? We're liberal. And I'm like, that's your answer? Your answer is whatever, deal with it. Law schools are liberal. That's my answer. Sorry if I fear-monger and made all Trump supporters on campus feel like horrible people. So, any thoughts?
Okay, first of all, I would have wanted to do what you did, but then I would have been afraid that I'd be kicked out of law school. And then this is so wrong, but as a parent, I'm very protective. And like, I feel like if I were your mom, I would have been there. which would have been totally wrong again. But I would have been like, oh, no, you didn't. You did not just talk to my son like that. And I would have words. And then you would be kicked out of law school because your crazy mom just gave in.
Well, this was at a time I was, and not to get too far off on a tangent, I was the president of the Student Federalist Society. And at that point, that was like the closest thing to like a right leaning
Right.
conservative group on campus, even though Federalist Society is a 501c3, so it can't be aligned politically, it can't do anything political. But people kind of like came to me as the president of Federalist Society, and they were telling me like teachers and professors at this time were fear mongering, and they were blaming Trump supporters, and they were saying people who voted for Trump and like calling them names and everything. You know, students are sitting in class like, I voted for Trump, like, and you're calling me a name. And so I felt like, okay, I got to say something, like this is getting out of control. So at that point, I was the only person really on campus who kind of was a representative of people who leaned our way. They weren't a big fan of me as Federal Society president. I would bring people on campus who, you know, were conservative or libertarian, and professors got all, you know, bent out of shape. Like we had one guy come in, Ari Cohn from the Freedom of Speech Society, FIRE, it was called, basically freedom of speech in like educational communities. And some professors were like, why are we allowing this guy on campus? And it's a guy who's coming on campus to talk about students' free speech rights on campus. And professors didn't like that he was coming on campus and wanted to stop him from speaking, which kind of proves his point that there is an issue with free speech on campus, especially in law school. Like law school is, you assume people in law school are like, you know, they're older, they're a little bit more knowledgeable, you know, like, I don't know.
Well, and
But
that to me even seems like a good debate topic, if you will. Like you would think that would, stir up really good conversation,
mhm.
which in the legal world, you tend to do a lot of that. I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of the whole thing. And so I would think that that would be like encouraged. Like not everyone's going to agree with this, but we're going to hear both sides of the story and see,
Yeah.
and they were probably super glad when you graduated. And so
No one
not
was.
to keep getting off topic, but because this is a whole part of your podcast and you have all these new subscribers right now. You were, I believe, raised in a Republican household. And I think you initially, when you first registered to vote, you were Republican, switched to Democrat at some point, and then switched back. Is that correct?
No,
No.
I never really knew my parents' politics
Okay.
growing up. And then I became a Democrat because of George Bush and 9/11, because he did the whole head fake and was like, we're going to go get the bad guys in Iraq. And I was like, wait, why are we going to Iraq? Like, Iraq has nothing to do with this. And then I was like, you're just doing this to like foster war. You have a personal vendetta against Iraq. And that made me a Democrat for a long, long time. And then eventually, you know, by the second term of Barack Obama, I started to figure out like the Democrat Party was not for me anymore. So,
Okay.
but my family now is very Republican and we talk about it all the time. So, but yeah, I have no qualms about the fact that I used to be a Democrat when I was
Oh, no, I
young and
know.
impressionable.
I actually feel like it's a valid point here, though, because even though you personally have, your right wing leanings, you've been there, you understand that Democrat side. And especially as a lawyer who, trained in law school, you are good at seeing both sides of the story. I
Mhm.
feel like you make a very fair point. So to new people here, while you may personally be a Republican, you're doing this podcast for all because you're just trying to kind of get down to the facts of the situation, not the emotions, it's just like whether or not you agree with it politically, you're like, here's what's going on. And
Yeah, that's a
I
good way to
just
put
wanted
it.
to kind of point that out and, so let people know like you have been on both sides of this fence.
Mhm.
Therefore, I feel like you're, very qualified for people to come listen to you.
It's a good way to put it. All right, back to sanctuary cities. All right, this was back in 2017. So SB 6 was by Democrat Senator Ben Hauso, titled Due Process for All, signed into law by Governor Jerry Brown, created a state program to fund legal representation for illegal aliens facing deportation. So that was signed into law, SB 6. AB 3 was proposed by then Assemblyman Rob Bonta, who is now our Attorney General, would have created taxpayer funded training for defense attorneys and public defenders on immigration law for illegal aliens. AB 3 did not pass. The third bill was SB 54, and that was basically when we became a sanctuary state. All right, so this is from 2017, and obviously, sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of like nullification and all that idea. If there's any libertarians who are listening, you know what nullification is. Nullification is basically like when states don't agree with a federal law, they just go, "We're not going to comply with it." So, go pound sand. But this isn't really the case here. This is Hans von Spakowski, senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He says, while there are many areas over which the states and the federal government share responsibility, immigration is not one of them. There are a long series of decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court upholding the authority of prior presidents under this provision and severely limiting the ability of the courts to review the president's decision. Unfortunately, at the urging of certain states, the courts have in large part ignored the Constitution, federal law, and prior precedents. They are instead substituting their judgment for that of the president and enjoining the president's executive order by implementing a temporary halt to entry from certain terrorist safe havens. Sanctuary cities are trying to prevent federal officials from finding out about criminal alien murderers, rapists, and other violent criminals that these cities would apparently rather release than have picked up and deported so they cannot further victimize Americans. And then he goes on to talk about a federal code section, which is 8 USC 1373, prohibits states and local jurisdictions, and this is key, from preventing law enforcement officials from exchanging information with federal officials on the citizenship status of individuals they have arrested or detained. So
I had to read that paragraph like 3 times to understand it because it felt like there was like a double negative in it, which there's not. But I was like, wait, I'm not understanding. I kept reading it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's when you read it, it kind of sounds like, well, then isn't sanctuary states or cities okay? But if you read it again, it says prohibits states and local jurisdictions from preventing their law enforcement officials. So basically, federal law says you cannot prevent local law enforcement from not working with the federal government on issues of immigration. And again, I don't want to get down in the weeds and get all wonky. There is this thing in the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause that when there is a federal law on point and it encompasses this area of law, it rules. So basically, the Constitution gives the federal government and the president all the authority when it comes to immigration. That's it. That's the name of the game. States don't get to really deal with immigration. And this U.S. code basically says you can't stop your local people from getting in the way if we have to enforce immigration. So right now, to answer the question whether sanctuary cities or states are legal, no, they are in violation of this code 8 USC 1373, which says you can't prohibit them or prevent them from working with federal law enforcement. So to answer the big question, are they legal? No. How will they go about enforcing sanctuary city, or I should say the other way around? How will they go about enforcing federal law? Tom Homan has said that they will probably go the route of withholding federal funding, which we'll get to in a little bit, why federal funding is so needed in California. But they can get sued by the federal government, U.S. Attorney General, who will be Pam Bondi, likely coming up in January, will sue states like California. And it's interesting, I think now that back then in 2016, it was like the cool thing to do, is the trendy thing to do for everybody to be a sanctuary city. And then eventually California was a sanctuary state. But now it's like, okay, it's this one, like Los Angeles is the only one that came out right out of the gate and was like, we're a sanctuary city. And everyone else is like, okay, cool. Like, good on you, bro. And like nobody's followed suit yet. Hey, thanks for checking out the California Underground podcast. If you enjoyed that clip, make sure you subscribe, like, share, review, comment, all that stuff that helps with the algorithm, helps people find us more. And if you want to learn more, you can always listen to our full podcast at Apple, Spotify, Google, all those different places that you basically find podcasts. Or if you just want to keep watching clips, you can check out clips here, or you can subscribe to our channel right here, somewhere in here.